NFL season, the process of ranking quarterbacks is a highly divisive and controversial topic. Fans and analysts alike seem to have a hard time figuring out what makes a quarterback a good quarterback. This is unlike most other things that you can rank in the NFL. Whether it's ranking teams, ranking wide receivers, ranking defenses, there seems to be a general consensus with most of these topics. But when it comes to quarterbacks, almost every person you meet will give you a different top 10 list. In fact, most people can't even agree who the best quarterback in the league is right now, whether it's Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts. No one can seem to agree on even a consensus number 1 quarterback. Those that favor statistics will probably put Joe Burrow at number 1. People who like quarterbacks who have won multiple awards in their life, such as MVPs, will probably put Lamar Jackson at the top. People that rank QBs by quote-unquote QB wins will probably put Patrick Mahomes at the top. But in my mind, there has to be an accurate way to objectively rank quarterbacks. So I developed a formula that combines a little bit of everything. By taking elements of statistics and eye test and QB wins and putting it all together, I've created a formula that pops out a number known as the AF score. Now you might be asking me, why is it called AF? And that's because it stands for, yep, you guessed it, animal football. So today we're going to be taking a look at this formula and ranking every QB based off of their AF score. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. So the first thing I want to make clear is how we're ranking these quarterbacks. This is not a QB ranking based off of who you would want going into next year. The reason it's not a ranking like that is because you have to do a little bit of future predictions. You have to include things in my formula such as upside and talent. You're essentially predicting how good they could be and then waiting and seeing if it actually materializes in the next season. Instead, what we're doing is we're taking a look at all the quarterbacks, how they performed in the 2024 season. So all statistics will be based off of only the 2024 season. Let's get into the very first piece of the formula, which is passer rating. Personally, I don't think you can rank quarterbacks based off of statistics alone, because something such as passer rating can be very deceptive. A QB can have a high passer rating if they had 2 attempts in the entire game and that was 2 touchdowns, but every other play was just the running back taking it down the field. Passer rating doesn't give the entire story of the game, but passer rating is a number that suggests that the higher the passer rating number is, the better the QB performed. Passer rating is calculated using a very complicated formula including completions versus attempts, yards versus attempts, touchdowns versus attempts, and interceptions versus attempts. I wanted to include passer rating instead of traditional things such as yards, touchdowns, and interceptions because I feel like it encapsulates all of that in its formula and gives a more accurate depiction of how a QB performed over the season instead of just so many yards, so many touchdowns, so many interceptions. Now, if we take a look at the best 2024 starting quarterbacks based off of passer rating, we have Lamar Jackson, Jared Goff, Joe Burrow, Baker Mayfield, and Jalen Hurts. This is a perfect example of why passer rating should be included in our formula. Here you have 4 QBs that threw for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns in the 2024 season. Lamar Jackson, Jared Goff, Joe Burrow, Baker Mayfield. But you also have a quarterback like Jalen Hurts who didn't throw for nearly as many yards, but was very efficient and effective with the limited amount of attempts he had, with a high completion percentage and a low interception rate. Once again, passer rating is not the end-all be-all because it does not tell the whole story, so we will add a 20% weight rate to our passer rating. Each element that we add to our passer rating will have a certain percentage weight, which at the end of this video will add up to 100% and will make our AF score. The next statistic we'll be using in our formula is EPA. Now, if you want to understand what EPA is, it is a little complicated, so I suggest you look it up online. But essentially what it takes into account is down, distance, where you are on the field, and depending on what plays you make, how efficient you were in scoring points. And even that is probably not the most accurate description, but what I do know is that it measures quarterback efficiency. I think quarterback efficiency is very important. We all know that a quarterback can throw for tons of yards if it's garbage time, but even if a quarterback like that has way more yards than a quarterback who has less yards, the quarterback who had less yards may have done more with less. So the 2024 top 5 quarterbacks based off of EPA is Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, and Patrick Mahomes. For many people, this is the consensus top 5. Maybe not in this order, but definitely these 5 names. So EPA will be added to our formula with a weight of 30%. The last statistic we'll be taking a look at is QBR. QBR is something that a lot of people probably do not like. The reason is because it's a PFF stat and a lot of people don't like PFF. I can kind of agree with that, but I like what QBR takes into account for its statistic. Not only does it take into account passer rating and EPA, but it also takes into account sacks and rushing, which again, depending on your flavor, if you prefer a pocket passer versus a dual threat, the higher the rushing score in clutch situations, such as a 3rd and 15 when the quarterback is rolling out, no one's open, and runs for a back-breaking first down. This will elevate the QBR score, which I think is very important to include. So the top 5 NFL QBs in the 2024 NFL season based off of QBR are Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, and Jordan Love. Once again, a very similar list to the EPA top 5, and we will add QBR to our formula with a 20% weight. So now we have passer rating with 20%, EPA with 30%, QBR with 20%, which adds up to 70%. We're adding one more element to our formula before we'll have our final AF scores. This final element is not a statistic. How clutch is your quarterback? I went through every quarterback and gave each quarterback a rating from 1 to 5 based off of their clutch factor. The way I define clutch is how well do you perform when you need to win a game, regardless if you actually win or lose, and regardless of how your team performs around you. I'm not going to share with you every single clutch score that I assign to every single quarterback, but I try to be as objective as possible. I took into account how well does this quarterback perform in the playoffs? Does their team lose because of them in the playoffs? Do they overperform or underperform in the playoffs based off of their regular season success? You can have a quarterback that puts up all the numbers in the regular season, all the wins in the regular season, but if they continuously lay goose eggs in the playoffs, they're not a good quarterback. As you can guess, Prescott and Justin Herbert both had very low clutch scores. I find them to be the NFC and AFC sides of the same coin. Herbert choked away like a 27-point lead in the playoffs to the Jaguars. After going the entire 2024 season only throwing like 3 picks, he threw like 4 picks in one game. Prescott has been to the playoffs numerous times since he's been the Cowboys quarterback, and while not every time the Cowboys have lost because of him, he's only had 1 or 2 playoff wins where he's performed up to par. Almost all the other games where they lost, he played awful. The most recent example being the game against the Packers where he threw like 2 to 3 picks. To me, Prescott and Herbert are generational chokers. That's not to say that they can't change in the future, it's just that right now, based off of their recent past, they've been chokers. Players such as Patrick Mahomes, Matthew Stafford, and Jalen Hurts have higher clutch scores. This is because these players show up to play in the playoffs for the most part. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes didn't show up to that Super Bowl and Jalen Hurts did, but you get my point. Also, a quarterback like Josh Allen does have a higher clutch score, but just not in the top tier. This is because he's won almost every single playoff game unless it's against the Chiefs, and even in these Chiefs games, he's usually not the reason why his team loses. Brock Purdy's another example of a QB who has a high clutch factor because he left the Super Bowl having been up in overtime. It's not his fault that his defense let him down and that the Chiefs won that Super Bowl. These are things that I am taking into account when calculating their clutch scores. So when I add a 30% weight to the clutch score and I add that to the rest of the formula, we now have our AF score for every quarterback. Now you might be begging me to show you these scores and show you how these quarterbacks were ranked, but we're not quite done. One more thing that needs to be accounted for if we're talking about which quarterbacks performed the best is taking into account the strength of the team around them. In 2024, Hurts was called a system quarterback and carried by his offense. This was the same for Brock Purdy in 2023, and it's hard to blame people for thinking that because when you do have great receivers, great O-line play, and a great running back, it does take a lot of pressure off the quarterback and they don't need to be as great as someone who has a lesser offense. So I found a statistic ranking every team based off of offensive supporting cast, which ranks the running back room, wide receiver room, and O-line play. Unfortunately, the most recent year that I could find these scores for was the 2023 season, and the quarterbacks that were rating played in 2024. Personally, I don't think any given team is going to have a majorly different score from 2023 to 2024. Of course, some teams did change a lot. For example, the 49ers were ranked number 1 in 2023, but in 2024, not only were they not as good, they also had a lot of injuries. So keep in mind, this is not a perfectly accurate statistic, but it will help a little bit. And what it will help do is even out the playing field, essentially taking points off of quarterbacks that were on stacked teams and adding points to quarterbacks that played on very weak teams. The better the team you played on, the lower you'll drop. and the same for bad team. This evens out the playing field so you can see how these QBs stack up against each other if they were on even teams. So now we finally have our QB AF scores and ranking. Finally rank these QBs. The higher the AF score, the higher they'll fall on the list. And I'll be honest, looking at this list, there's a lot of things I like about it. At the end of the day, not everyone's gonna agree, including myself, because I didn't personally rank it this way. This is just the ranking that the formula spit out. I would personally have several QBs moved around. So while maybe this isn't the ranking that all people can agree on, maybe this is a ranking that most people could agree on. For me, there's only 2 outliers on this list, which we'll get into, but let's start going through these quarterbacks from the bottom to the top. Since 2 teams do not have starting quarterbacks, we'll be starting with number 30, Will Levis. 29, Anthony Richardson. 28 is our first outlier with Dak Prescott. As much as Dak Prescott gets hated on, and I'm an Eagles fan, so I definitely don't like the Cowboys, there is no way he's a bottom 3 quarterback. Now, maybe based off of his play of last year, he didn't do that great. Obviously, he got injured, but passer rating, EPA, and QBR doesn't care about the bulk of passing yards. It worries more about how well you played in the games that you did play, and Prescott did not play well. It also doesn't help his case that he has a low clutch score, but personally, I would have Dak Prescott definitely up this list. Next up is Caleb Williams, Michael Penix Jr., Bryce Young, Drake May, Justin Fields, and our next outlier at CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud does not deserve to be down this list over at 22. He's definitely in the top 15, if not the top 10, but he did not play well this year. Everyone knows that he went through a sophomore slump. But once again, this is not a ranking of who you think could be good or who has the best upside or who has the most talent. This is just a ranking of how well did this quarterback perform this past year while also taking into account the team around him. After CJ Stroud, we have Trevor Lawrence, Sam Darnold, who by the way was higher up on this list before I added the team scores, which definitely brought him down because the Vikings were stacked. Next up is Russell Wilson, then Tua Tagovailoa, Aaron Rodgers. Once again, no one's taking Aaron Rodgers at 16. This is just based off of how well they played this past season. Bo Nix, Derek Carr, Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert. Ooh, I know people are going to get upset over that. Matt Stafford at number 11. And finally, we're getting into our top 10. At number 10, we have Jordan Love. At number 9, Brock Purdy. At number 8, Jared Goff. At number 7, Baker Mayfield. At number 6, Jalen Hurts. And now we're getting into the top 5. Lamar Jackson at number 5. At number 4, we have Jaden Daniels. At number 3, Josh Allen. At number 2, Patrick Mahomes. And of course, at number 1, Joe Burrow. Now, before you run to the comments complaining about how your favorite quarterback isn't higher on this list, remember, I did not choose exactly where these players land on this list. I just developed the formula that ranks these quarterbacks in a non-biased way. Now, I don't have much to comment on the top 10 quarterbacks here. I feel pretty confident that all the quarterbacks that are included in the top 10 deserve to be there, except for maybe switch Love and Stafford, or maybe put Justin Herbert in there except for someone else, maybe Purdy or Goff. I think the fact that Burrow takes the top spot makes sense. He was absolutely insane this past year. Mahomes at 2 is actually a little surprising, but I don't think his offensive cast was that great, and his clutch factor is also high, so that probably brings him up. Josh Allen at 3 kind of makes sense. Jaden Daniels over Lamar Jackson at 4 is definitely interesting, but that might take into account that Lamar Jackson has a far better offensive team around him than Jaden Daniels. It could also be because Lamar Jackson has a lower clutch score than Jaden Daniels because of how often he chokes in the playoffs. I can't disagree too much with Hurts, then Mayfield, then Goff, and then with Purdy and Love, I believe both of those quarterbacks are a lot better than people are making them out to be. Especially Purdy, most people have him as a very mid quarterback. And once again, I'm an Eagles fan. I do not like the 49ers that much. But I'm going to be perfectly objective. He had an awful offensive team around him this year. Mostly because of injuries, because Deebo Samuel's washed. And yet he still put up great numbers. Of course, this list is not perfect. Obviously, Herbert should be higher. Stroud and Dak Prescott are not in the right spots. But I feel like this is a list that most people could look at and make a case for every single spot. Now, if you think there's a better way to rank these quarterbacks, maybe there's other elements that should be included. For example, talent, or air yards, or turnover worthy plays, or a different statistic such as completion percentage. If you think these things should be added to our formula, let me know in the comments, talk about it in the comments, discuss what you think of this formula, what you think of this quarterback rankings list, because this is just the first iteration of the formula. This is just the beta version. We still need to polish it, work out the kinks. So once again, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you watching all the way to the end of this video. Make sure you subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that as well. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take it easy.